Welcome to Watching Comics with me, Chris Otto, where I share my thoughts and opinions on comic book movies and television shows. And on this episode of Watching Comics, I'll be talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But before I get to that, let's have a quick recap of what's happened this week in comic book television. This week's episode of Gotham, entitled Red Hood, was, as the title implies, about the Red Hood gang. And I like the way they established the Red Hood gang, because I think an important part of who the Red Hood gang is that it's not the same guy wearing the red hood every time. You know, whoever's wearing the red hood is leading the job, but there is no leader that actually leads the Red Hood, which I think makes the gang really unique in the comics, in that you never know who's in charge. They really just kind of pick whoever's best for the job to wear the red hood and lead the job. So I thought that was really cool, the way they introduced the Red Hood gang and saying, you know, as long as someone is willing to put on the red hood, they'll continue to exist. Also in this episode, Fish Mooney meets the manager of the weird prison everyone's being held in. The manager finally gives up a name of the doctor in charge, Dr. Dolmacher. Of course, that's I guess a Germanized version of Dollmaker. You know, as a character, he tears people apart, put them back together. We see Barbara with her new BFFs, Selena and Ivy. She seemed kind of drunk, but was trying to be nice to them, give them some of her old clothes. Ivy, of course, really liked it. Barbara's seemed kind of weird. Like I said, that's why it seemed like Barbara was drunk. She kind of had this weird thing going on with Selena, trying to tell Selena that she should, use her looks to her advantage. Then Selena's like, oh, what have your looks ever done for you? And left. Also, one of Alfred's old war buddies shows up at Wayne Manor. Of course, Bruce Wayne, the young Bruce Wayne, is all like, no, come on in, we'll give you food and a place to sleep or whatever. But Alfred's not a big fan of this. Alfred's friend then sees Bruce Wayne after he's been training, since, Alfred's been trying to help him train, learn how to fight. Alfred's friend, Reginald Payne, Reggie, as Alfred calls him, shows Bruce, he says, technique will take you a long way, but I'm big, you're small. You gotta use the fact that you're small to your advantage. If I'm big, take out my legs, use whatever's around you. Alfred, of course, sees this and puts a stop to it, saying that, that's not the way you're supposed to fight. It's technique. And the young Bruce Wayne says, yeah, but his methods are effective. I think this is the first time that we get to see that, Alfred's not a big fan of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman. And I like this idea that, in a lot of ways, Batman fights dirty. He does whatever he can to win a fight. He finds your weakness and exploits it, whatever your weakness may be. He uses lots of weapons and tools to his advantage. So I think this was an interesting way to establish that this is how Bruce is eventually going to learn how to fight. That night, Alfred finds Reggie stealing from the manor, and when Alfred confronts him about it, Reggie stabs Alfred and leaves. And when we last see Bruce and Alfred is in the hospital. Jim Gordon goes to visit and talk to Bruce. Then we see that it turned out that Reggie was hired by the board of executives at Wayne Enterprises to spy on Bruce Wayne, see what he's figured out in terms of what the board is responsible for. That really revealed the board at Wayne Enterprises to be a bunch of shady sons of bitches. This week's episode of Agent Carter, entitled Valediction, was also the season finale. We finally saw what Leviathan had in mind, and they were going to release the chemical that made everyone crazy on Times Square, but we weren't sure how, and then ultimately it was revealed that their plan was to capture Howard Stark, have him focus, and make him believe that he's actually doing something else. I don't know. It was very unclear what he thought he was doing, something about finding Captain America or picking up Captain America, but basically they tricked Howard Stark into flying his own plane and dropping this gas over New York City, and a scene that was definitely done on purpose to be like the ending of Captain America, was Peggy on the radio talking to Howard, trying to talk him down, convince him that what he believes he's seeing isn't real. And of course, while she's doing that, Jarvis, the only other person there who knew how to fly a plane, is ready to shoot down Howard should Peggy not be able to talk him down. But of course, Peggy is able to talk him down. He realizes he's not actually doing whatever he thought he was doing with Captain America, and lands his plane. The Russian doctor who was hypnotizing everyone finally gets his comeuppance when Sousa and Thompson come after him. He gets the drop on Thompson, hits him with like a lead pipe or something. Then Sousa sees him, tells him to freeze, tells him to put his hands up, starts doing his whole, focus thing, tries to get Sousa to be hypnotized. It's looking like it's working. He's playing into Sousa's disability. He's got Sousa pointing his gun at Thompson, and then Sousa looks at the Russian doctor in the face, pistol whips him pretty much. Then Thompson is all like, oh, what happened? And then Sousa takes earplugs out and is like, oh, is he saying something? But yeah, it was a good episode. It was exciting. I really liked this season of Agent Carter. I really hope there's more. And if there is more, I want to see more of Dominic Cooper as Howard Stark. I think he's perfect as Howard Stark. Honestly, I think both guys that have played him as Howard Stark has been perfect. And I loved John Slattery as Howard Stark in Iron Man 2 for the 5 minutes he's in it, because, well, John Slattery is also pretty much everything he's in. He's my favorite. Adjustment Bureau, Mad Men. John Slattery is awesome. There needs to be a show with him playing Howard Stark, which I guess he's basically playing Howard Stark in Mad Men. Why am I talking about Mad Men? This is about comic books. Anyway, Agent Carter, I thought it was a good show. I'd love to see more of it in typical Marvel fashion. Bit of a cliffhanger where the good Russian doctor is put in a prison cell, and his cellmate is Dr. Arnim Zola, who basically implies what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has already told us, and Captain America Winter Soldier has told us, and that's that Arnim Zola and Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. early on. So I'd like to see that play out in future seasons of Agent Carter, like I said, if there are future seasons. This week's episode of Arrow, entitled Nanda Parbat, featured Thea, now that she knows that she killed Sarah, decided to give up her father, Malcolm Merlyn, who brainwashed her into killing Sarah, to the League of Assassins. So League of Assassins shows up, kidnaps Malcolm Merlyn. Ollie finds this out and is like, Thea's gonna regret this, so we need to get Malcolm back. And of course everyone is like, that's a horrible idea. Malcolm's a terrible person. Why would you want to help him? But Ollie is like, nah, Thea's gonna regret this. We need to get Malcolm back. So Oliver goes to try and get Malcolm back, but the League of Assassins managed to get away with him anyway, but not before Ollie is able to capture Nisa Al Ghul, has her trapped in his Arrow lair under the club. And basically it's implied he plans to torture her, interrogate her or something. But then Nisa Al Ghul pretty much says, no, I'll tell you where Nanda Parbat is, because I know once you go there, you're gonna get deaded. So Ollie gets ready to go, and Diggle says, I'm coming with you, man, because every sentence Diggle says ends in man. They go to Nanda Parbat, fight their way in. They find Malcolm Merlyn. Of course, it turns out to be a trap. Ollie and Diggle are now chained to a floor. Earlier in the episode, Diggle said he wanted to ask Ollie for a favor, but then didn't. So Ollie asks what the favor is, and Diggle is all like, nah, I can't tell you now, man. And Ollie is like, nah, you may not get a chance. So Diggle says after his brother Andy died, he thought he'd never have another brother like that again. But then he met Ollie, basically saying Ollie is like a brother to him, and he plans on marrying Lila, his Argus girlfriend, and he wants Ollie to be his best man. So then some assassins show up, take Ollie to Ra's al Ghul. Ollie is all like, you can kill me, but let Diggle go, let him go home. And Ra's al Ghul is like, you're an awesome dude. You're pretty badass. So I'm not gonna kill you, Ollie. Instead, I want you to be the next Ra's al Ghul, which is cool and all, but it really annoys the crap out of me how much they're taking from Batman. on Arrow. Like, if you want to make a Batman show, then just make a Batman show. Don't call it Arrow and then just give them Batman stories. Also, this episode, we saw that Ray Palmer can't get anything done unless he bangs Felicity, because that's what it took for him to finally get his Atom suit to work and fly around the city. And my biggest problem with the episode, though, was that, all right, throughout the entire first season, Laurel and her father, Detective Lance, blamed Oliver for the death of Sarah. Now, Sarah drowned in a boating accident, or at least that's what everyone thought at the time, that Sarah had drowned in a boating accident. You know, the yacht sank in a storm. Ollie was the only one who survived. So everyone blamed Oliver for the death of Sarah. So at the beginning of this episode, Thea goes to Laurel and says to her, I'm the one who killed Sarah, you know, under the mind control of Malcolm Merlyn. But it was me who shot the arrows into Sarah's chest and killed her. And how does Laurel react to this? Oh, that's okay. It was Malcolm's fault. It's not your fault. I'm like, this bitch, fucking the first season, you blame Ollie because your sister drowned. Thea tells you she shot your sister with bows and arrow, but was under mind control. Oh no, it's not your fault. It's the fault of who had you under mind control. Like, what the hell? She's saying she actually is the one who physically killed your sister, and you're not mad at her. But when you thought your sister drowned, you blamed Ollie instead of Aquaman or someone. I don't know. Now, in all the excitement of recording my first podcast last week, I forgot to mention in the TV recap The Walking Dead. Honestly, the reason I forgot to mention it is because I don't watch it. I've had no interest in it from the moment it came out, have no interest in the comics. So unless you want me recapping either not knowing what's going on or having no interest in what's going on, you won't really hear me talk about The Walking Dead at all. Before I get to this week's topic of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I want to talk about something, though not necessarily comic book related, but I think it counts as superhero related, and that, of course, is the Power Rangers fan film that was released earlier this week, and it was a pretty violent R-rated fan film. Kind of set up this idea of post-war kind of story. You know, it took the idea of Power Rangers, because at its core, Power Rangers is about teenagers being recruited to fight a war that up until this point they had absolutely no part in. You can either take that idea and turn it into a children's show or turn it into a very dark and serious action film, and that's what this filmmaker did. Because let's face it, an entire generation grew up watching the Power Rangers, and now that entire generation are young adults who have the ability and time to make a fan film like this. So it was fun to watch because it's using those original characters. The only character I didn't know who he was, I had to look it up because I didn't remember him, was James Vanderbeek's character, Rocky, who was the second Red Ranger after Jason. But, you know, it features Kimberly, Jason, Billy, Tommy, Trini, I think that was her name, Zach. It featured all the original Power Rangers. I also heard that the lawyer representing the creator of the Power Rangers was trying to get it taken down, so hopefully you can still find it online. And now for this week's topic, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which of course started with Iron Man back in May of 2008. At this point in time, my interest and knowledge of comic books was very limited. I was mostly only reading Batman or Punisher graphic novels, but I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn as much as I could about what was going on in the world of comics. I had a friend who knew a lot about the DC universe. You know, he taught me a lot. You know, just talking to him, I'd learn a lot about the characters. And then I joined some various online communities, one of which talked a lot about the Marvel universe at that time and recent history. I remember I know the Civil War storyline had been over for a while at that point. I think people were still arguing about it. So it was a good way for me to get an idea of what was going on in comics at the time without really having to read comics. I was aware of what was going on in the comic book world without actually reading comics because I didn't even know where to look for comics. I didn't know where there were any comic book stores or anything like that. So in May in 2008, I was actually looking forward to The Dark Knight, which would come out that July. But Iron Man comes out, and everyone is going on about how great this film Iron Man is, calling it the greatest comic book movie ever made. Eventually, I went to go see it, and it pretty much lived up to the hype. It was a very exciting and fun comic book film. Also had some actors I liked in Terrence Howard and Jeff Bridges. At the time, this was Iron Man was kind of Robert Downey Jr.'s return to form, if you will. So it was a mix of that, Tropic Thunder, and Sherlock Holmes that really made Robert Downey Jr. a big name again. So he wasn't really, even though he's the star of the film, he wasn't one of the actors that I was really like, oh yeah, I need to see it because he's in it. But like I said, it was a fun movie to watch. It was exciting. It was a new character for me. I had watched an Iron Man cartoon as a kid, but before the Iron Man movie came out, if you asked me what Iron Man's real name was, I couldn't tell you. It was exciting for me because it was, again, for me, I was learning. I was learning more about the world of comic books. And so I watched the film, I enjoy it. I love the idea that he didn't care about having a secret identity just at the end, instead of coming up with whatever bogus story he was told to tell by everyone's favorite S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, Phil Coulson. He just went up there and was like, I am Iron Man. We get some Black Sabbath playing. A lot of fun. And now at this point in time, I'm not sure if I was told to stay for the credits or if I had already adopted the policy of staying for the credits. Because I had a film history professor, he put it this way. When you go to see a play, you don't leave before the cast takes their final bow. So when you go to a film, why would you leave before the credits are over? And I always thought that made a lot of sense. So I've always stayed for the credits, whether I thought there was a scene at the end or not. I stayed for the credits. Usually, some good music plays during the credits. So it's a good time to just sit there, take in the film I just watched. So sure enough, at the end of the credits, there is a scene where Samuel L. Jackson, as Nick Fury, wants to talk to Tony Stark about the Avengers. The comic book fan in me was vaguely aware that a team called the Avengers exists. I was aware that Ultimate Nick Fury in the Marvel Ultimate Universe does look like Samuel L. Jackson, so that was a real kick to see Samuel L. Jackson playing a character that was drawn to look like him. But I was more excited as a movie fan than as a comic book fan, because something I've always loved about movies is when movies can exist in the same universe without being sequels to each other. And that's something that I always enjoyed about Quentin Tarantino films, and especially Kevin Smith films. The vast majority of Kevin Smith's films take place in the same universe. And I've always loved that idea, that events and characters in one film affect what happens in another film without the other film being a direct sequel. It just takes place in the same universe. So it was that got me really excited. And I was like, you know what, this is going to be fun, getting to meet all these new characters in solo films, and then we all see them work together in the Avengers, which seems so far away at that point, the idea of an Avengers film. So then a month later, The Incredible Hulk comes out, which was a film I was pretty excited about because it starred Edward Norton, who I love. He's one of my favorite actors. And I saw this film and was pretty disappointed. I was hoping for a lot more, especially after the hype that Iron Man raised for this idea of a shared universe. So I think it was pretty disappointing to see The Incredible Hulk and see it, it basically only existed to establish that the Hulk exists in the same universe as Iron Man. And I think that was a real bummer that it wasn't a better film. Because in my opinion, the best part about the film is one of the deleted scenes on the Blu-ray, where if you pause it at just the right point, you can see Captain America. Like that's the best part about the Incredible Hulk. You see Captain America in a deleted scene. So that was kind of a bummer and really kind of turned me off on the idea of this shared universe. Then a month after that, Dark Knight comes out. Everyone is going crazy over the Dark Knight. So I just kind of forgot about this idea of the shared universe. I figured I'd check out the movies eventually, but it wasn't a priority for me to see these movies. And plus, it was almost 2 years later before we got the next film, Iron Man 2, in May of 2010, which, again, I didn't go see right away. I had to be convinced to go see it because part of that, other than the fact that I was kind of turned off by Incredible Hulk on this whole Marvel shared universe idea, was that I didn't like the idea that they were giving Iron Man a sequel already. You know, you've only introduced two heroes. You've introduced Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, and you're already giving Iron Man a sequel. I really didn't like that idea. I thought it made more sense. Everyone gets a solo film, then the team up. Everyone gets their sequels, then another team up. That's what I was kind of expecting. So I was surprised to get a Iron Man sequel before we even saw anyone team up. Of course, like I said, everyone convinces me to go see this film, so I finally see it. You know, it's fun to see Phil Coulson with a bigger role. And then he, of course, mentions that he's going to New Mexico. And the scene after the credits is him arriving at Thor's hammer in New Mexico. So that set up the film of Thor, which I had no interest in, which is weird for me to think back on because me and my brother became interested in Norse mythology, and my brother got really into it way more than I did. I had like a passing interest, you know. I was listening to a lot of Manowar, so I was into it because of that. But my brother, he got really interested in the history and read a lot of the mythology. And so all the things I learned about Norse mythology, I learned from my brother because he was so into it. He would tell me about all these crazy adventures that Thor and Odin went on. Thinking back on it, I'm surprised I wasn't more excited about a Thor film. But I think part of the problem was I didn't understand how Thor fit into the Marvel universe because Thor, as a superhero, was described to me as being the alter ego of just a normal guy. He was described very much as being like the Incredible Hulk, or more like Shazam, where he's a kid who can then turn into Shazam. And I didn't understand how, why turn into Thor? If that's who you're gonna, why turn into someone from mythology? I didn't realize that, you know, for the most part, Thor in the comics is based on the Norse mythology. And so I was very confused about that until I finally saw the film and saw, oh no, they're not using a guy who turns into Thor, they're using Thor. So I really liked the film, and of course this film, they introduce Clint Barton, Hawkeye, who is another agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. And in Iron Man 2, going back, is when they introduced Agent Romanoff, Black Widow. It was nice they were doing a good job of introducing all these characters. And then finally we come to Captain America in July of 2011, which was the one film no one had to convince me to go see. I wanted to go see Captain America because me and my brother, again, we were both pretty interested in Captain America, especially my brother. You know, we consider ourselves to be quite patriotic, so we love this idea of, you know, a superhero leading the troops in World War II. So we were really excited to see Captain America, and that honestly turned out to be the best film of that first phase of films, and it was just so amazing. I still think that's probably the best film. As much as I love Iron Man 2 and Mickey Rourke, I think Captain America was definitely the best. Even my parents went to see Captain America. You know, that's how much... I think that really shows you how good the film is. Especially my mom. She's not a superhero fan, but she loved this Captain America movie. So I think that really says a lot about the kind of films they were finally getting the idea of how to make these consistently really good and emotional films. They weren't just superhero films anymore. They were good films, and it was nice to see, you know, Marvel Studios, you know, it's Marvel in control of their own movies. So these are comic book fans making comic book movies. And I think that's a large part of why the Marvel Cinematic Universe started out so well, because you finally had people that took comic book movies seriously. Up until this point, you had people that didn't even read comic books making comic book films. So now to have people that were comic book fans making comic book films, it made a huge difference in the quality of these films. So obviously at the end of Captain America, you get, after the credits, a trailer for The Avengers, which would come out a year later in May of 2012. And as I talked last week, I love The Avengers. I think it's such a fun film. You know, it was so cool to see all these characters on screen together. I was quite bummed that Edward Norton wasn't reprising his role of Bruce Banner, but it was, Mark Ruffalo did a good job putting his own spin on the character of Bruce Banner. He very much made it his own. And as I said last week, my favorite scenes in the film are Mark Ruffalo and Robert Downey Jr. going back and forth in the lab on the helicarrier. I think it's just the chemistry between those two is amazing. Speaking of recasts, I need to step back for a second to Iron Man 2. Another reason I wasn't too happy about this film was that they had recast Don Cheadle as Rhodey. Terrence Howard wasn't going to be in it, and I loved Terrence Howard as Rhodey, so I was bummed to see him not as Rhodey. So that was another reason why I was hesitant to go see this movie. One of my favorite actors from the first movie wasn't going to be in the sequel. Back to The Avengers. It was, like I said, a lot of fun to watch. It has its problems, the scene at the end with all the Chitauri dying at the same time for some reason. I still don't understand that. I don't understand why they couldn't just wait for Tony to come back through the portal after the threat was gone, but whatever, you wouldn't have the suspense and the effect that had on Tony without that. And then, of course, in the middle of the credits of that film, we get introduced to Thanos, who, at the time, I didn't know who Thanos was. I walked out of the theater saying, okay, obviously that guy is someone important, but I don't know who he is. A friend that I went to see the movie with tried explaining to me who Thanos was, and I was like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Eventually, I looked him up, and I know he also got his own comic book series. It was a short series, only made like 5 or 6 issues, Thanos Rising. And that made that ending scene make a lot more sense, because it explained, because the line the guy says to Thanos is to challenge the humans on Earth would be to court death. And Thanos smiles. And Thanos Rising helped me understand, oh, Thanos is in love with death, like death personified, not as in like murdering people, which I guess he is kind of really into, but he's in love with the personification of death. He's in love with the Grim Reaper, who's, a chick to him. So I thought that was really cool, establishing Thanos as a big bad villain, not someone who's gonna, they didn't show him, then say, oh yeah, he's the next villain. You got to go through like 3 other villains before you even get to him. So I really liked that. The first film in Phase 2 after the Avengers was Iron Man 3, which definitely took a different direction than the first 2 Iron Man films, because we had a new director in Shane Black, who I liked what he did with Iron Man 3. It was a shame that Mark Ruffalo wasn't in more of it, because, like I said, I loved seeing Robert Downey Jr. and Mark Ruffalo work together in their scenes in the Avengers. So I was so hoping for at least a scene or 2 in Iron Man 3 of the 2 of them, talking, because that was just so much fun to watch. We did get a scene between them after the credits, but it wasn't quite what I was looking for. But it was still a really good film. Again, a lot of fun. That's what I feel like the theme behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that they're just fun films. I also liked that Iron Man 3 is really the first film, like the films in the first phase all were setting up the next film. So Iron Man introduces the idea of Avengers and, introduces Nick Fury. Incredible Hulk establishes that the Hulk and Iron Man are in the same universe because Tony Stark shows up after the ending credits. Iron Man 2 introduces the idea of Thor. So we see Thor's hammer at the end of Iron Man 2. And then in Thor, I can't remember if there's any specific references to Captain America, but I know that if you again pause the film at just the right moment, you can see the Infinity Gauntlet in the background. And of course, it turned out the Tesseract from Captain America is one of the Infinity Stones that are used with the Infinity Gauntlet. The first phase was very much about setting up the next film. So what I liked about Iron Man 3 was that it wasn't trying to set anything up. It was just there on its own. Unfortunately, Thor the Dark World, in my opinion, exists solely to set up the character of the Collector for Guardians of the Galaxy and introduce another Infinity Stone. I think that Thor the Dark World is definitely, it's tied with Incredible Hulk for weakest film in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe because I feel like it wasn't that great of a movie. It felt like it only existed to introduce another Infinity Stone and the Collector. But then they follow that up with Captain America the Winter Soldier, which was just a really good film, a real exciting film. I maybe a year before Captain America the Winter Soldier came out, I was told by a friend to read a comic about the Winter Soldier. There was a Winter Soldier comic ongoing at the time. I asked my friend, what should I be reading in the Marvel Universe right now? And he, among others, mentioned the Winter Soldier. So I started reading the Winter Soldier, and then the next Captain America is called the Winter Soldier. Then I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I'm reading about this guy, and he was a character I really liked, so I got really excited to see this film, and I'm glad it lived up to what I was expecting. We also got introduced to a new character, Sam Wilson, the Falcon, who in the comics is actually Captain America right now, but it was nice to see they're adding more characters because at this point in time, I think there was already talk that the Avengers we know now aren't always gonna exist. Like, I think there's talk that by the time we get to Infinity War, we might have a completely different team of Avengers, which, on the one hand, is a shame because we all love these heroes, we all love these actors, but at the same time, these are really good actors that want to do something other than comic book movies. So I wouldn't be surprised if certain members of the Avengers either die or just kind of don't do the whole Avenger thing anymore as we move on in this cinematic universe. And then the most recent film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that came out was Guardians of the Galaxy, which I was really excited for. I started reading the Guardians of the Galaxy comic that's ongoing right now, and I really liked the characters, so I was excited to have this film come out because I knew when the film came out, I wanted to have an idea of what I was getting myself into. So the film comes out, I went to go see it, and my initial reaction to the film was that it was kind of disappointing. The most memorable part was the introduction of Thanos, like the real introduction of Thanos, because I know it had only been, whenever Comic-Con was right before Guardians of the Galaxy is when they were like, oh yeah, Josh Brolin plays Thanos. And I guess I didn't pay that much attention to what they said because I figured they meant, oh, down the line, when we finally use Thanos, it's going to be Josh Brolin. And then I go see Guardians of the Galaxy, and here comes Thanos looking like Josh Brolin and sounding like Josh Brolin. And I'm like, holy shit, this is Josh Brolin as Thanos. And that was just so awesome. Like I said, I went from seeing the Avengers having no idea who Thanos is, reading about Thanos in Thanos Rising. Thanos was also a main villain in another storyline I had just read, to being blown away at what Thanos looked like in Guardians of the Galaxy. So that was really the only thing that stuck out, except for, of course, the scene after the credits, which I'll get to later. But yeah, I felt like Guardians of the Galaxy, it felt similar to Thor, that it existed only to introduce another Infinity Stone. Came out on Blu ray. Of course, I bought it because I'm compulsive and need to own every single Marvel film on Blu ray. I watched it again, and this second time watching it on Blu ray at home, it was like, oh, now I get it. Now I could see, I think because the first time I watched it, I'm trying to take it all in. All I really could remember was Thanos and the Infinity Gem. Now that I knew what to expect while watching it, I thought it was a much better film. And then, like I said, the most memorable scene in the film for me was after the credits. The Collector is sitting there, and the dog Cosmonaut, Cosmo, I want to say is the character's name. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Is licking the Collector's face, and then you hear Seth Green say, "Oh, you let him lick your face? That's gross." And he's, of course, voicing Howard the Duck. And they showed Howard the Duck on screen, and I lost it. I started laughing. I started laughing from the second Howard the Duck came on screen to me getting in my car in the parking lot. I was still laughing about Howard the Duck. That's how funny I thought it was, because I think I had just so happened to find Howard the Duck on TV shortly before I went to see Guardians of the Galaxy. So that first ever Marvel Comics film, Howard the Duck, was fresh in my mind when I see Howard the Duck show up in Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was with a friend, and we're leaving the theater, and I'm just laughing and laughing and laughing at this. And my friend is like, "I guess you'll explain this to me?" And I'm like, "Let me stop laughing, and then I'll explain it to you." And like I said, it wasn't until I made it to the parking lot that I was finally over it enough to tell my friend about Howard the Duck and how ridiculous it was that he showed up in Guardians of the Galaxy. So that takes care of what we've seen so far in the cinematic universe. As for the future, this May we'll be getting Age of Ultron, which is looking to be really awesome. It'll be our first time seeing Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who were introduced in the post-credit sequence of Winter Soldier. This is looking like it's going to be an exciting film. And I heard it's going to be long. I heard it's going to be like 2 hours and 40 minutes. And then later this summer, we'll have Ant-Man, starring Michael Douglas and Paul Rudd. Ant-Man is a character I know absolutely nothing about, but it seems like it should be fun. And then after that, we'll be getting Captain America Civil War. Now, Civil War is looking to be quite the film. Not only because of the storyline that it's based on, but when Sony was hacked, emails were released about the possibility that Spider-Man might be showing up in a Marvel film. And then it wasn't all that long ago that Marvel and Sony released a statement saying that they'd come to an agreement where a rebooted Spider-Man would be introduced in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then in 2017, July of 2017, that Spider-Man will get a solo film. And as the hacked emails implied, the film Spider-Man is most likely going to be introduced in is Civil War, because Spider-Man played a big part in the comic book storyline of Civil War. I know him unmasking himself was a big part of the storyline. And I've actually seen an interesting idea online, people saying that they should keep the identity of who's playing Spider-Man a secret until he takes off his mask in Civil War. Now, obviously, that would be completely impossible, and depending on who they cast, might not mean anything. The guy could take his mask off, and it'll be like, wait, who the hell is this guy? No one's even heard of this actor. But yeah, that's looking to be a really exciting film. After that, we'll be getting a Doctor Strange film. We'll be getting a Guardians of the Galaxy sequel, Spider-Man, like I said, Thor Ragnarok in November of 2017. If you know anything about Norse mythology, you know that Ragnarok is their Armageddon. That's how they believe the world will end. So there's some talk that they might kill Thor off in this film. As I mentioned before, there's rumors that eventually this team of Avengers that we know won't exist anymore. Characters will die, or just not be part of the team anymore, which would be interesting to see happen on screen because Winter Soldier already implied that Bucky Barnes, the Winter Soldier, is starting to remember who he is. Because in the comics, yes, he was a bad guy, but then eventually remembered who he was and is now a good guy. There's a lot of people that wouldn't be surprised if they kill off Captain America. Bucky Barnes might take up that title of Captain America because he did in the comics. Wouldn't be surprising to see him do it in the films. So yes, after Thor Ragnarok, we get Infinity War Part 1, which, like I said, by then there could be different Avengers. After that, between Infinity War Parts 1 and 2, we get Black Panther and Captain Marvel, then Infinity War Part 2, and then Inhumans. Now, the thing about this schedule is that this was changed after the announcement was made about Spider-Man being part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. See, Spider-Man's release date was originally Thor's release date, Thor Ragnarok's release date. So originally, Black Panther was supposed to come out before Infinity War Part 1, and Captain Marvel and Inhumans were supposed to come out between Parts 1 and 2. Which had people speculating that probably means Captain Marvel and the Inhumans have something to do with what happens in Infinity War Part 2. But now that the release dates have been shuffled around and Inhumans is in fact coming out after Infinity War Part 2, there's some questions about the role the Inhumans would actually play in Infinity War now. On all the Blu-rays for most of these films, they featured short films called Marvel One-Shots, which, one-shots, of course, refers to the single-issue comics that will occasionally come out. They call them a one-shot. So these short films, they called one-shots, and they usually expanded on the storyline or showed, something silly that happened, to some of the less important characters or maybe characters that didn't get as much screen time in a film. You get to see them doing something else. One of my favorites was a funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer, which shows Phil Coulson stopping at a convenience store on his way to New Mexico. The convenience store is then robbed while he's there, beats the crap out of the two guys robbing the convenience store, and then pays for the snacks and gas that he wants and tells the woman behind the counter to say that she was the one that beat them up. And then leave. So that was one of my favorites. But an extremely popular one was the Peggy Carter one-shot, which showed her taking on a mission that she wasn't really supposed to take on, doing a badass job of taking care of this mission. And then it ends with Howard Stark calling her boss and saying, "Oh, Peggy deserves more than what she's getting," or "Peggy's working for me now." I forget exactly what happens, but it was an extremely popular and well done one shot, which is why Peggy Carter eventually got her own show, Agent Carter, which, as I mentioned earlier, just had its season finale. It was a good show. I really enjoyed it. It's always fun to see Howard Stark, as I mentioned. And speaking of television, Marvel's biggest show is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which kind of got off to a rough start. A lot of people weren't impressed with it when it first came out, and I can understand why, because no one's a fan of the show on its own. The people who watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are people like me who have watched all the Marvel films. It complements the Marvel universe. So I can see how a lot of people may not like the show if they're not as interested in the cinematic universe. I think it's a great show. Like I said, the first season got off to a rough start, but eventually it picked up, especially once Winter Soldier came out and it intersected with that storyline of, Hydra turning out to be inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. this entire time. that's when the show really picked up. Then this season, you see Phil Coulson and his team trying to rebuild S.H.I.E.L.D., but we also get a lot of the more alien and supernatural portions of the storyline. Last season, they introduced the Kree without even naming them. They just kind of showed what a Kree looks like, but didn't say, oh, this is a Kree. And then this season, the mid-season finale introduced the Inhumans. It turns out Skye and Raina are Inhumans, and this coming Tuesday, we'll get to see what they've become, what powers they've gained. And another show that we can expect from Marvel is the Daredevil show that will be on Netflix. Now, what has me excited about Daredevil is that up until this point, as I've said multiple times this week, Marvel Cinematic Universe is a lot of fun because most of the films hit this sweet spot where it's for kids and for adults at the same time. Kids love it because it's the superheroes and it's not too dark or mature for little kids, but adults like it because it's not too cartoony for adults. Whereas Daredevil is going in a different direction. Even though it takes place in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel isn't, gonna push things too far, they're letting, since it's on Netflix, because Netflix lets you do whatever the hell you want, Daredevil is pushing boundaries in the Marvel Universe. It's not quite R-rated, but it's more than PG-13. So I'm really excited to see what happens in that, because what that is that, after the aliens attacked New York in the Avengers, well, now there's cleaning up to do on the streets of New York. And that's what Daredevil is doing. And as I said, this cartoony, relatively child-friendly nature of the Marvel Cinematic Universe makes me wonder about certain characters that are not child-friendly at all. And that, of course, is one of my favorites, the Punisher. I know there was talk of a Punisher series, but I don't think that's going to happen. And it might be better that it doesn't happen, because for me, I feel like the Punisher wouldn't fit in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as it is right now. I think Punisher would just be too extreme of a character. I think it would be hard to introduce the Punisher in that. I think it would be very much like when they tried to use the Punisher in the Spider-Man animated series in the mid-90s. They introduced the Punisher, but he's not allowed to kill anyone. He's only allowed to use concussive blasts or something. I don't even know. It was kind of well, that's what the Punisher does. He kills people. So as much as I'm glad that Marvel does have the rights to the Punisher, which means they would treat the Punisher well, I don't know how well the Punisher would fit in to what Marvel has established. So that's my thoughts on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If there's anything you think I left out, should have mentioned, or think that I have the wrong opinion on, let me know. Facebook.com/WatchingComicsNY or on Twitter @watching_comics. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Otto, and I'll see you next week.